Here we will look at solving quadratic equations by using square root. I'm going to do some of the even problems, and your assignment will be to complete the odd problems. So I'm going to start with number 4. In number 4, our objective here is to get this square term by itself. So in order to do that, I need to add the 17 to both sides. Doing that, I eliminate everything except that squared term on the left, and I get k squared is equal to 17. The last step to get the variable k solved for would be to take the square root of both sides of our equation, and in doing so, we will always remember to do the plus or minus. In this part here, we will now have just a k on the left-hand side. And on our calculators, since 17 is not a perfect square, we will approximate that and substitute that into our solution. Our answer here would be a positive or a negative 4.1 if we were to round to the nearest tenth. We're now going to move on to problem number 8. In number 8, we also need to go through and isolate our squared term. Our term is by itself, but we do need to go through and get that factor of the square all by itself. So we're going to go through and divide both sides by 3, leaving just the n squared on the left side. And when I divide the 81 by the 3, I get a 27. Now that the squared term has been isolated on the left-hand side, I again can go through and take the square root of both sides, incorporating that plus or minus one more time. On the left-hand side, I'm left with just the n, and since again, similar to number 4, 27 is not a perfect square, I will substitute that into our calculators as well, and rounding that to the nearest tenth, I get a 5.2. So we will have solutions of both the positive 5.2 and the negative 5.2. So as you can see, the calculators are important to have handy as we're working through the square root process. In number 10, 2 steps are required here to get that square all by itself. So first we will go through and get the term with the square all by itself, which is that negative 5x squared. When I simplify the right-hand side by combining the negative 179 and the negative 1, I get a negative 180. I still haven't gotten that squared factor all by itself. I need to do one more step here, and that would be to divide through by the negative 5. When I divide through by the negative 5, 180 divided by 5 does yield a nice whole factor of 36. The final step now, seeing that my squared term is all by itself, is to go through and take the square root of both sides, doing again the plus or minus to incorporate both of our solutions. And on the left-hand side, I am left with just the x. And what's nice about problem 10 is the square root of 36 is a nice perfect square of 6. So our answers there are positive 6 and negative 6. Moving over to the page 2, I'm going to go through number 14. On 14, a little different from the ones on the front, we now have a quantity that's being squared. So the squared term is already isolated here. We can go through and take the square root of both sides. I'm just going to rewrite this here. Still incorporating my plus or minus on the left-hand side. Here on the right, the square and the square root undo each other to leave you with just n minus 9. And on the right, we do have a perfect square of 225 as the value of 15. So the only step that's left here now is to get that n term by itself. And to do that, we will add the 9 to both sides. And when we work this solution through, we just need to incorporate both the positive and the negative 15 into our solutions. So one answer will be the 15 as a positive, and then add the 9, and then we'll take the negative 15 and add the 9. So my first answer here would be 24, and my second answer here would be negative 7. So the final problem that I want to go through is number 18. 18 involves a couple of steps to get the squared quantity by itself. We notice that it's here in this first term, so I'm going to go through and isolate that first by subtracting the 6 from both sides. I'm left with 8g minus 9 quantity squared, and on the right-hand side a 32. Now we need to get that factor that's being squared completely isolated. So we're going to go through and divide through by 8, leaving just that quantity of g minus 9 squared on the left and simplifying this right-hand side to 4. The last step that we need to do here is to take the square root of both sides, again incorporating that plus or minus on the right. It is a perfect square of 2. At this point, we go through and solve by subtracting the 9, and we would get a g equals negative 7 and g equals negative 11. You now can complete the odd problems for practice. Thank you.